In this video, we'll be talking about the cardiac cycle. Previous video, I had explained about the structure of the heart to you, and we have studied that heart conduction system consists of the sinoatrial node, the atrioventricular node, the bundle of His and the Purkinje fibers, which together form the AV node. So the bundle of nodal fibers, AV bundle, will form the AVN, and this entire system regulates or controls the heartbeat. Coming to the cardiac cycle now. Cardiac cycle refers to the sequence of events that take place during one heartbeat. And the heartbeat consists of systole and the diastole. When the heart contracts, the portion of the cycle in which the heart contracts, it is known as the contraction. Contraction is known as systole. It can be auricle or it can be ventricle. If it is auricle or atrial, we call it as atrial systole, and if it is the ventricles, we call it as a ventricular systole. The another thing is the relaxation period. The relaxation is known as diastole. That is, when the atrium relax, it is known as atrial diastole, and when it is the ventricles, then it is known as ventricular diastole. So the cardiac cycle is a sequential cycle, and it is cyclically repeated and consists of systole and diastole of both the atria as well as the ventricles. Now let us start with the cardiac cycle. To make you understand easily, I have arranged it in the form of sequence of events. Now, these events are together and result into the cardiac cycle. So, it's a complete cycle of the one cycle of the heart. Let us begin. Now, the first is when all the chambers of the heart are relaxed. Since all the four chambers, that is the two atria and the ventricles, are relaxed, we call it as a joint diastole period, because there is no contraction taking place. All the muscles of the heart are relaxed, all the chambers are relaxed. Now, when after this, the tricuspid and the bicuspid valves open. At the same time, the blood from the pulmonary vein carries oxygen-rich blood from the lungs to the heart, and it enters into the left atria, from where it will pass on to the left ventricle. Also, the blood from the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava, that is carrying the deoxygenated blood due to the metabolic activities by the cell, this deoxygenated blood enters into the right atria, or from there into the right ventricle. So the blood from the pulmonary vein and the blood from the vena cava enter into the left ventricle, left auricle, and the blood from the vena cava enters into the right auricle. From there it will be passed on to the left and the right ventricles. The position of the semilunar valves at this time, they are closed. So the semilunar valves, which open to the pulmonary artery and also to the aorta, will remain closed at this point. The SN, that is the sinoatrial node, which is present towards the right atrium, it generates action potential. Now, what is meant by action potential? The action potential is actually caused by the movements of the ions across the cell through the ion channels. Now, it is produced by the cells of SAN. because the SAN cell, that is the sinoatrial node cells, are specialized cells that have the capacity to generate action potential automatically. Now the action potential which is generated over here is quite different from the electric potential which is generated in the nerve cells. So the SN generates action potential, and the action potential which is generated by them is around 60 to 100 action potentials per minute. Now, all of us are familiar with are straighted, they are branched, and they are linked together. So they are electrically linked also, and as a result the action potential passes from one cell to the other cell very rapidly, and due to this the atrial and the ventricle, that is both the chambers, contract simultaneously. That means if the atrial auricle or right atrial chamber is contracting, all the cells of the atrial chamber will contract together, or if we are talking of the ventricles, then the ventricles will also contract together. This is this action potential generated passes very rapidly through the chambers. Due to the action potential which is being generated by the SAN, the atrial chambers contract, because remember the blood from the pulmonary vein and blood from the vena cava has already entered into the auricles. Now due to which the atrial chambers contract. Now it is known as atrial systole. This creates a pressure and the blood rushes to the ventricles. Now, when the blood is rushed to the ventricles, the increase is about 30 is there, it increases about 30 to 50%. And at the same time, the action potential which was generated by SN now passes to the atrioventricular node and the AV nodes, that is bundle of His and the Purkinje fibers. This action potential which is being passed from SAN causes ventricles to contract. That is known as ventricular systole. At the same time, since all the blood has passed from the atria to the ventricles, the atria relax and it is now known as atrial diastole. So ventricular systole and atrial diastole almost happen together. Now, to prevent the backflow of the blood from the ventricles into the atria again, because the blood has been rushing due to the opening of the valve from the auricles, we know the atria has the valves, bicuspid and tricuspid depending. It allows the flow of blood in one direction only. Now the blood is flowing to the ventricles. These are the ventricles over here. Now the blood which is passing from atria to the ventricles should not go back. So for this reason once the blood flows into the ventricles, these valves close, the bicuspid and the tricuspid valve close, so that no backflow of the blood takes place. Now, due to the ventricular pressure, that means because of the pressure, the blood has entered into the ventricles with great pressure, the ventricular pressure increases further and this causes the semilunar valves to open. Now this opening of the semilunar valves causes the opening to the pulmonary artery and the aorta to open, allowing the blood to go or rush through these and enter into the circulatory pathway. Now, after passing the blood to the pulmonary artery, which will carry the blood to the lungs, and the aorta, which will carry the blood to different parts of the body, the ventricles now relax and then they enter into the phase of ventricular diastole. So after this period, After this has happened, the ventricles now will undergo, that is ventricular diastole. They will undergo the period of relaxation. So the blood has now entered into the main pathway where it will be circulated throughout the body to different parts. Now the ventricular pressure goes down, and this causes the closure of the semilunar valves, again preventing the backflow of blood into the ventricles. So ventricular diastole is taking place over here. This is the 13th step. Also the semilunar valves close. Now this prevents the backflow of the blood back into the ventricles. Now the ventricular pressure gradually will decrease, and the tricuspid and the bicuspid valves are again open due to the pressure in the atria, which is exerted by the blood again coming from the pulmonary vein and from the vena cava. So it is a continuous cycle, and which happens as a result, again the ventricles and the auricles are again in joint diastole state. Again the action potential will be generated by the SAN, and this follows the rhythmic cycle in sequence. Now when we talk of the cardiac cycle, as told, action potential which is generated is around 60 to 100 per minute. Now heartbeat, around it is 72 beats per minute. For a normal healthy person, the heartbeat is around 72 per minute. That means we call it as a pulse also. Now when the heart beats around 70 times per minute, we can calculate that the cardiac cycle duration is of 0.8 seconds. So this entire process which we have talked happens within 0.8 of a second. Now during the cardiac cycle, the blood which is pumped out, each cardiac cycle, the blood which is pumped out is around 70 ml, 70 milliliter of the blood, and this is known as the stroke volume. So we call this the during the entire process which happens in 0.8 by the ventricles to the through the aorta to different parts of the body. So this is 70 ml of blood which is known. And calculate the cardiac output also. Cardiac output, if we call study cardiac output will be the that is the stroke volume multiplied by the number of beats per minute. So if we stroke volume into number of beats per minute gives us the cardiac output. So this cardiac output helps us to understand whether the heart is functioning properly or not. So the cardiac output is defined as the volume of the blood pumped out by each ventricle per minute, and it is approximately, it comes out to be 5 liter. It comes out 5 liters in a healthy individual. Now the body can change. Now when we are talking of this term, all the three terms, these terms are relative. That means we are talking in a normal healthy individual and in normal physiological conditions, but these can vary depending upon the activity of the body. For example, the cardiac output of a person who is not doing any strenuous physical activity will be much less as compared to a person who is exercising or doing heavy physical activity such as athletes and all. So the cardiac output of those people will be high because the number of beats will also be high and the stroke volume will also be high. The reason is because at that when a person is doing a lot of physical activity, large amount of oxygen is required by the body, which is then met by beating the heart faster. So we can calculate the cardiac output and it can vary upon the conditions. Now when cardiac cycle is stopped, there are two different sounds which are heard. Now one sound that is known as the lub sound, the lub sound is heard, that is when the tricuspid and the bicuspid valves close. That is closing of the tricuspid and the bicuspid valve. When that happens, it happens when the atrial chambers contract and the blood has entered into the ventricles. That time the lub sound will be heard. The second is the dub sound. The dub sound is heard when the semilunar valves close. It is when the ventricles empty themselves. So we have the closure of the semilunar valves. Now these lub-dub sounds are important. When we are saying these are important as clinical diagnostic significance, because these sounds, if are proper, they give us an indication that the heart is functioning properly. But if these sounds are not proper, that there is some problem with the working of the heart, maybe the valves or maybe the contraction is not taking properly.